Just before we get to the video that you actually came here to watch, let me tell you about a new channel that I'm running called Decoding the Unknown. It's a show where I take a long, deep dive into some of the world's biggest mysteries, from what happened to the Roanoke colonists to the regular guy who found a listening device in his power strip. It's absolutely terrifying, and it's always a bit of a wild ride. You can find a link below. I hope to see you over there. The past, it's that time where all of that interesting stuff happens, and what better way to learn about it than by digging it out of the ground? You thought I was going to say YouTube. No. Of course, it's more archaeology. Archaeology is the study of human activity through physical objects. These objects can range from a small carved statue to entire ruined cities. But this is all still archaeology. For that reason, archaeology is one of the more diverse historical disciplines, and as a result, one of the more interesting ones to read about. It's never quite certain what you might find. Sometimes you can find something truly breathtaking. Here's just a few of those archaeological wonders that have been found over the years. In 1940, in the French region of Dordogne, an 18-year-old man named Marcel Rabidet was hiking with his dog, Robot. Suddenly, his dog fell into a hole, only emerging sometime later, fortunately unscathed. Rabidet was intrigued, though. The next day, he returned with some friends to the hole, intent on going inside. And they did just that, dropping down into a hole that was more than 15 meters deep, believing that they'd found what could possibly be a secret passage to a nearby manor. But that wasn't what they'd found. Instead, they discovered that the interior of the cave was decorated with paintings, and hundreds of them. They depicted abstract patterns, but also humans and animals. And curiously, some of the animals depicted were, by that point, extinct. This included creatures such as the megaloceros, an extinct species of deer that reached sizes up to 2 meters tall at the shoulders, and a European woolly rhinoceros. It was clear that Rabidet and his friends had found something truly special. It's not clear what they did next exactly. Some sources say that they camped outside the cave for a year to protect it. Others say that they told their teacher. Whatever the case, the cave remained something of a secret for several years as World War II came and went. But following the war's end, responsibility for the cave was taken up by the newly established French Fourth Republic, who opened the cave to the public in 1948. This was also when serious research began. And here's the overall summary. The Lascaux cave paintings were at least 17,000 years old, placing them near the beginning of the Magdalenian cultures, so named for another archaeological site called La Madeleine, also in the Dordogne region. These people lived in Europe while it was still under the Ice Age, when most of northern Europe was covered by massive sheets of glaciers. It was an extreme environment, cold and lacking in vegetation, on the very fringes of where life was possible. But it was still possible, as the paintings in Lascaux show. Aside from the giant deer and furry rhinos, the most abundant depictions on the cave walls show horses, with over 300 of the more than 900 animal paintings being equestrians of some kind. In second place is deer at 90 paintings, which are believed to have been one of the primary food sources for these societies. And lastly, there are paintings of cattle and bison, including the now extinct aurochs, the apparent ancestors of today's cows and bulls. What's most impressive about these paintings, however, is that they exist at all. The hundreds of artworks are located deep within the cave, where natural light didn't penetrate. This would have required some kind of light source, probably a lit lamp with animal fat. Some paintings are located high up, even on the ceilings of the cave, which would have required special means to reach in order to paint that high, scaffolding or a ladder of some kind. A supreme amount of effort, beyond what normally goes into creating art, was put into making these paintings, indicating that it was supremely important in some manner. And what manner was that? Well, we don't know, and most likely we never will. Were they practical guides for the outside world depicting animals that a person could expect to find? Was there some kind of ritual motivation behind them, a means of prayer or honoring some long-forgotten god? Or was it just the intrinsic value of art and seeking to make a dull cave that countless days were spent in just a little bit nicer? All we can say for sure about the Lascaux paintings is that they are there. Well, we actually have to put an asterisk on that statement. In 1963, the cave was closed to the public as the many visitors who came to see the paintings were filling the cave with moisture and carbon dioxide from simply breathing. This encouraged the growth of molds and lichens, which damaged several of the paintings. Today, Lascaux remains closed, but a painstaking recreation was made in the form of Lascaux 2, which is open to visitors, and Lascaux 4, a museum built in the same village, which does much the same. It's not the original, but it can be agreed that it's for the best. Meanwhile, researchers have made successful attempts to restore the original paintings and to further decode the artworks that they haven't yet identified, trying to glean glean all they can from what's left of lives long since ended, from people that many of us are long descended from. There's a lot of things that predate history, such as, to pick an example completely at random, religion. It's a surprisingly consistent theme throughout humanity that societies come to believe in beings that are all-powerful in some manner or another, that created, influenced, or otherwise affected the world around them in some way. For something so widespread, it's therefore no surprise that religion is also very old. With that, let's head to the Middle East, in an area that is today located in southern Turkey. Unlike the Lascaux Cave and others like it, the human societies that formed in these spaces 10,000 years ago lived in permanent settlements rather than temporary living spaces that were inhabited for some time before moving on. This was facilitated by the agricultural revolution, when people started to drop nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles in favor of sedentary lifestyles, although it should be noted that there's a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario going on here in terms of whether agriculture or the settlements came first. Whatever the case though, humans stopped moving and started farming. And with permanent human settlement comes many different things, such as trade, writing, and of course, religion. In this place, somewhere in the ballpark of 10,000 years ago, these first settled humans created what is, as far as we know, the first human temple, the Gebekli Tepe, a pilgrimage destination for groups of nomads who hadn't yet settled down. Well, that's one interpretation of it at least, and it's probably going to be wrong. Yes, we just spent the last minute baiting you out. Sorry to any archaeologists watching this who were tearing their hair out. If you're at all familiar with Gebekli Tepe, then you've probably heard it described as the world's first temple. But in the time since that interpretation was made, more research has been done, and archaeologists have uncovered evidence that points to permanent population near the site and even rudimentary methods of collecting and utilizing rainwater for agriculture. Indeed, many of the original interpretations have been revised or abandoned over the years, and there's a good reason for that, as the people working on this have literally barely scratched the surface. Less than 5% of the site was fully excavated in 2021, meaning that the findings and the conclusions could be wildly different even a few years from now, which is all rather exciting. So, what do we know for sure about this site, and what's interesting about it, other than it being one of the oldest structures in the world? Well, for one thing, the site is located a good distance away from any sources of fresh water, which explains the aforementioned harvesting of rainwater. This was also one of the reasons for the original nomad temple interpretation. The other main reason for believing the site was supposed to be a temple had to do with what remained of it. The most salient parts of the ruins are special buildings, of which all that remains are pillars with elaborate carvings on them. These consist of, big surprise here, animals, including cattle, dogs, cats, possibly foxes, and more besides. This is another example of the same problem that's facing the cave art, for example, like in Lascaux. What did these carvings mean? Were they ritualistic, practical, or did they just look nice? We just don't know. But in this case, there is at least a chance for additional context to help us form a more complete picture, both in the form of further research and possibly with context from later civilizations filling in the gaps. That's a really big if on the second one there. The first Babylonian Empire, to pick a random example, was in its heyday around 1700 BCE. Remember, the Gebekli Tepe is estimated to have been built around 10,000 BC, making this site more ancient to ancient Babylon than ancient Babylon is to us. So there's a decent chance there's a limited amount that we can ultimately learn about this place, just as there's a limit on what we can learn from Lascaux. Again, the broadest and perhaps best takeaway that can come from this site is that there were people here, and they left their works behind. For the last entry that we talk about today, we're going to go to Mesoamerica. The regions of what is today central Mexico have been continuously occupied by various cultures for thousands of years, and as a result, they are absolutely littered with ruins and archaeological sites. Many of these are incredibly well preserved, either through luck or conservation. One of the peoples that lived in this region were the Zapotec, who are estimated to have first originated around 700 BC and lasted all the way through to the Spanish conquest of Mexico in 1521. That's quite a long time to would leave a mark on the region, and the Zapotec ruins are among the most numerous of Mexico's pre-Columbian cultural sites. And that brings us to a hill in the area of Santa Cruz, Zocotlán, small municipality a short distance away from the city of Oaxaca. Here, in 500 BC, on a ridge overlooking the valley of Oaxaca, the Zapotecs flattened out the land and built a city, one of the oldest known settlements in Mesoamerica. The building didn't happen all at once. Instead, it occurred in phases, with the first phase lasting 100 years to 400 BCE and the second lasting 300 years to 100 BCE. The end result was a functioning city with a population that's estimated to have been over 17,000 people. This would also make it one of the largest Mesoamerican cities for its time, before the comparative megacities like Tenochtitlan even existed. From this settlement, the rulers projected power far and wide, extending their influence to reach into the surrounding valleys and across much of Oaxaca. There's even evidence to suggest that the Zapotecs had regular contact with the city-states of the Valley of Mexico, such as the city of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is another incredible archaeological site, but honestly, it deserves its own video. Maybe you should subscribe. We're actually already working on that video. The city declined in relevance as time went on, and it was eclipsed by larger, more powerful neighbors. It was fully abandoned around 1200 CE, a little over 3 centuries before the Spanish arrived. But it remained relatively well preserved through the era of conquest and colonialism, attracting both local and European visitors. And this brings us to another point. You may have noticed that Monte Alban is not a very Mesoamerican sounding name. The original Zapotec name of the city is not known, and surprise, surprise, it's not clear if it ever will be. The city was abandoned before the earliest indigenous sources available to historians were ever written, meaning that for now, the original name is just lost to history. But the city itself remains in good condition for its age, and it stands as one of the best preserved remnants of Zapotec culture. Now, it's possible that as time goes on, the descriptions of the sites mentioned here will change, perhaps considerably. Until then, this was only a short list of the many, many archaeological sites that we could have examined today. There are many more that didn't get mentioned, such as the tomb of the first emperor in China, the site of the famous terracotta army, which we did a video about already, check it out, or anything from ancient Rome, Greece, Egypt, Persia, etc. That list practically never ends, but this video must. And yes, please do check out that terracotta army video. I'm going to link to it on the screen now. And as always, thank you for watching.